as you figured out.
Around 100 passengers, 9 crew aboard. This is the dramatic photograph CNN has obtained, the first picture of the fire that burst from the rear of the aircraft before it exploded in a hotel complex in a ball of fire. It was in that complex where the 4 people died. The full assessment of the ground injuries has not been received yet. There are still more developments as we hear from the French government. Night has fallen in France now, but the effort of rescue crews continues in Gonesse, France, which is about 3 miles north of the end of the runway at Charles de Gaulle. So, as you can tell, the plane crashed shortly after takeoff. Water and foam is still being spread on the crash site. You see a white building there, which is part of the hotel complex. A restaurant and hotel structure was engulfed in flames, as we saw in some early amateur video. That is apparently where the ground casualties took place. The supersonic jetliner turned that area into a burned-out shell, according to our CNN correspondent Jim Bitterman, who we've been hearing from, and we'll hear again from, who is in Gonesse, France, covering this. Air France officials say the crash apparently resulted from engine trouble. However, many aviation experts we've spoken to say it's too early to make that assessment. In the meantime, all of the remaining Concorde jetliners, and there were until today's crash only 13 of them in the world. The British and the Air France corporations have grounded their fleets indefinitely. We're continuing to follow the story. We'll have more news as soon as developments become available. We'll stay right here and bring that to you. We'll take a break. Bobby Batista and more of Talkback Live after the break.
For the most complete coverage of the Republican National Convention, stay with CNN, America's convention headquarters.
Every online investor dreams of finding a broker with low commissions, cutting-edge technology, and personal customer service. At Scottrade, we've got you covered. Our real-time streaming quotes and charts are eye-popping. And when you combine that technology with $7 market orders and customer service delivered through 115 branches nationwide, you have an online brokerage firm that simply can't be beat. Open an account today and receive our real-time streaming quotes and charts through the end of the year, absolutely free. Scottrade.com.
It's the 21st century, and you thought the internet would make life easier. But who can remember all those websites? Then remember this one, rewards2k.com. The one address for all your favorite stores. Finger Hut with thousands of quality products, domestications, beautiful home furnishings at great prices. Improvements with innovative products for home and garden. Best of all, when you shop rewards2k.com, you get free rewards. Log on today, or for more information, call 1-800-4REWARDS.
Dick Cheney on Larry King Live tonight.
Again from CNN Center, the first ever crash of a supersonic Concorde jetliner. It happened today at 10:44 Eastern. That would be 4:44 Paris time. These are the early shots of the plane taken by an amateur photographer just before the plane landed in a ball of fire. Fire pouring from the left engine. Air France has said it was engine trouble which caused the crash, even though aviation experts say it would be too early to make that assessment. The plane was chartered by a German tour agency, the Daleman Agency, hauling 100 passengers to a cruise ship in New York. At the time of the crash, the plane was barely off the ground, about 200 feet into the air, and went down in the ball of flames as the pilot apparently tried to make some corrections to avoid the disaster. CNN's Jim Bitterman is in Gonesse, France, where he's been most of the afternoon keeping watch on the situation there. Jim, what's new?
There's kind of a grim vigil that's developed here this evening. Basically, we're being kept away from the aircraft scene, the crash scene, while the investigators go over the crash scene. I think it's going to be some time before we're allowed anywhere close to the scene, because I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done there. for one of the things they're going to have to recover these bodies. They've put up large lights around the crash scene, which is right near a hotel, which has sort of become the communications center, and and that's from the place where the police and fire officials and aircraft inspectors are operating out of, from that hotel, which narrowly escaped being hit by the aircraft as it was going down. The one building that was hit is nothing more than a smoldering ruin now, and it was in that building that 4 people on the ground perished. On the ground itself, there's very little to see in terms of the aircraft. The fact is there's nothing but burned and blackened and twisted metal that remains. There's a part of a door that I could see. It looked also as if perhaps several vehicles may have been hit on the ground as the plane came down. But other than that, there's very little for investigators to look at. I'm sure what they're looking for mostly is the black box. That shouldn't be too difficult to find, in the sense that, in fact, it is the wreckage is concentrated in an area of about 100 yards in diameter. So I think that they will be able to search that area fairly quickly and find the black boxes that were on board the Concorde. Lou?
We're seeing the smoke in this video from the crash earlier in the day. Did any of this disrupt the flight activities at Charles de Gaulle?
No, in fact, this was far enough off the runway that it didn't cause any problem for the flights that were either departing or arriving. And one of the things that became evident right away when I arrived on the scene was the fact that the plane was dead center on the flight path, because we were seeing planes come off the end of the runway and pass directly overhead. The crash scene is about 3.5 miles off the end of the runway, within sight of the control tower, and also within sight of the control tower of Le Bourget, which is an airport about 5 miles away from Charles de Gaulle, and possibly an alternative airport for an aircraft in trouble. But in any case, it was still, the aircraft went down some distance, perhaps a mile away from the runways at Le Bourget.
Are there any indications that the authorities, the investigators themselves, may be talking with media anytime soon?
My guess is not. I think that they're going to want to go over this scene carefully. The accident happened shortly before 5 o'clock local time, and the sun went down about 4 hours after that, so that they had a little bit of time to look over the scene, but the plane was still burning at that point. I don't think they're going to get a chance to really get a good look at the scene until daybreak. So my guess would be that we're not going to hear much from them before the morning.
All right. Jim Bitterman will be there when we do hear from them. CNN Jim Bitterman, our man at the scene in Gonesse, France, scene of that horrible tragedy involving the crash of the Air France Concorde jetliner earlier today. I'm Lou Waters at CNN Center. Now back to Bobby Batista and more of Talkback Live.
Okay, let me go back to the audience here quickly. Amos had a good question.
My question is, what does the choice of Cheney remind people about Bush's senior? I remember during the primaries, Bush's senior was saying that people should vote for his boy. And I don't think that image sits well with the public. We don't want a boy to be in the White House.
Tori?
Well,
David, go ahead.
Well, Jeff Greenfield earlier on the network said that this brought to mind the notion of adult supervision in Washington for George W. Bush. I mean, if it does do that, it certainly doesn't help George W. Bush, the governor of Texas, that he has a fellow who is equated more with his father's generation. Even though there's not a lot of age difference between George W. and Dick Cheney, it does look like he's picked a father figure to guide him on the rest of this campaign.
Again, I go back to the fact that people look at the top of the ticket, and with all due respect for people like us who love talking about these things, the race really starts after the conventions that are coming up in the next few weeks. And I think people will really begin to see George W. in a new and different light, and they'll see what people in Texas saw, which is a real strong ability to attract independents and moderates and to attract women and minorities. I think that will come to shine through a lot more. Again, with all due respect to Dick Cheney, the focus is going to be on George W.
Mike from Minnesota, where their governor was elected by young people, has a good observation.
Well, Jesse Ventura won on the fact that he was able to get the youth out to vote, and this selection doesn't indicate that he's out for that vote.
Well, I don't think there's anything about Dick Cheney that's going to appeal necessarily to 20 to 30-year-olds. It's a backward-looking pick, not a forward-looking pick. But we keep coming back to the same point over and over again. This is something that Tori and Bill Schneider earlier all agree on, that these decisions don't have a big impact, I think, on the campaign in and of themselves, although they can perhaps validate other events that happen and cause people to, give them more evidence to have whatever opinions they have.
Tori, any thoughts on the youth vote real quickly?
No, I agree completely. And again, if you look at Governor Bush's track record in Texas, he does pretty well in that regard. And he has some terrific surrogates out there for him. For example, George P., his nephew, who's doing a great job not only with the youth vote, but the Hispanic vote. Two strong target audiences going forward.
And I have to laugh at this. It's all about style. Can anyone tell me why we should listen to what George P. Bush has to say about his uncle, other than I like my uncle, he's a good guy? I mean, again and again, and I mean, I would hope that my nephews and nieces say the same thing about me when I run for the presidency. But over and over again, we keep coming back to stylistic questions about George W. Bush and about his campaign, and I hope that at some point that most of the people sit down and look at the substantive issues driving this campaign and look at the other candidates too, like Pat Buchanan and Ralph Nader.
And Harry Brown, who we're having on the show, by the way, on Thursday. Tori Clark and David Korn, thank you both very much for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Joining us now is Alan Lichtman, Professor of Political History and Chairman of the History Department at American University. He is the author of Keys to the White House. Also on the phone with us, Steve Talley, author of Bland Ambition, From Adams to Quayle, the Cranks, Criminals, Tax Cheats, and Golfers Who Made It to Vice President. Alan, let me start with you quickly. Historically speaking, how important is the choice for Vice President to the candidate?
Oh, about as important as a John Nance Garner Vice President of Franklin Roosevelt said of the vice presidency itself. It ain't worth a warm bucket of spit. We vote for the top of the ticket. We don't vote for the second choice. Remember Dan Quayle. George Bush Sr. picked Dan Quayle when he was 17 points down in the polls. Everybody said, God, Bush is now doomed. He went on to win by about 7 or 8 points. That said, though, in this particular election, which is very close, where you have some major third-party picks, on the margins, the vice presidential pick could make a difference. And here's my assessment of Cheney in a few words. A first-string pick in terms of the substance, a fourth-string pick in terms of the appeal to the American electorate. Look, certainly he fills holes in the George W. Bush resume in foreign policy and defense policy. He could step into the White House, and he knows how to be a good number 2 guy. But look, unlike Liddy Dole, he doesn't appeal across the gender line. Unlike John McCain, he can't electrify the American people. He's not going to bring in the moderate Democrats and the independents in droves. He has a hard right voting record, which isn't going to help with the kind of folks that Bush needs to win. He's associated with the oil industry. He's a CEO. We're already hearing the Democrats saying, aha, this just shows that George Bush is in the pockets of big business.
Steve, I'm reading from the back of your book now, Bland Ambition. Who wants a job that seems the embodiment of second fiddle, the essence of insignificant influence, a political punishment? Why would Dick Cheney want this job?
Well, you're right. A lot of people don't want the job. In fact, Daniel Webster, over a century ago, said, I do not propose to be buried until I am dead. I think Dick Cheney is a prototypical vice president. If you look at the history of vice presidents, very often they're longtime party loyalists, they're well-respected, they have significant experience and know the mechanics of government. I think Bill Schneider earlier called him affable, and I think you could describe a lot of vice presidents that way. On the other hand, you could also describe a lot of vice presidents as dull. There's not a lot of vision with the vice presidents. So
it seems to me that the main reason that most would take the job of vice president is because they eventually would like to run for the presidency. I don't know if that's true for Dick Cheney or not. I
don't know if that's true either, but starting with World War II, if Gore is elected this time, if it works out that way, half of the vice presidents will have become president. So since World War II, it's been a good path to the presidency.
Alan, do vice presidents and presidents always get along, is that necessary?
It is certainly not necessary, and they certainly do not always get along. You know, Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy certainly did not particularly get along, and Lyndon Johnson chafed in that vice presidential position. He thought it was beneath him. He thought he was more important. He was probably right as Senate Majority Leader, and then, of course, with the sad twist of fate, he became President of the United States. But in recent years, the vice presidency has become a more substantive position unto its own right, and we should consider that in evaluating Dick Cheney and Al Gore's pick. Al Gore really has become the prototypical modern vice president. He was an important advisor to Bill Clinton Low these many years. He did have substantive roles in the administration, and he was absolutely the logical person to become the Democratic nominee in the year 2000. So you got to set aside kind of some of our old ideas about the vice presidency earlier in the 20th century, in the 19th century. It's a much more important job than ever before, and unlike earlier years, it really has become the stepping stone to the presidency.
And
if you're vice president, you're almost sure to be your party's nominee if you want it.
And Steve, do you I mean, with the choice of Dick Cheney as your running mate and as your vice president, do you think that it's possible he could expand that role even more?
Oh, I think it's quite possible, and I would hope he would. As you can tell from the subtitle of my book, I've been critical of the office. I think, as our grandfather's truism goes, that idle hands are the devil's workshop, and I think that it is good for a vice president to be active in the administration, and I would hope that if George W. Bush was elected president, that he would expand that role.
Let me take a quick break, Chris, and then I'll get to your question when we come back, okay? We'll be back in just a moment.
Yes, I need to report my bag was stolen. We were on the beach, and I turned around for 2 seconds, and my bag was, excuse me, my wallet was in there, and my husband's wallet, and I had about $500 worth of cash. And I don't understand this. This has like never happened to me before. I just don't know what to do. We only turned around for 2 seconds.
When your eyes feel dry, gritty, irritated, protect them with Refresh brand eye drops. First, Refresh relieves dryness, then Refresh forms a lasting shield of protection that keeps irritation out and moisture in. Refresh. It relieves and protects.
From Amazon.com to Yahoo, from Cisco to Sun, companies that know the Internet best run Oracle. Oracle. Software powers the Internet.
Hi. Oh, your hair is... Come on, let's take a big picture. Everybody, let's take a picture. Hey, Debbie. Can I get a copy of that? Can we get a copy of that? Can I get a copy of that?
You get an extra. I'll take a copy of it.
Can we get a copy? We'd love to have a picture.
Now everyone can get an email copy and buy reprints online.
Can I get a copy?
Can I get a copy of that?
Get a copy of that?
Try it free. Photoworks.com.
Cheese!
Picture what's next.
Superior Bank introduces its new Opti-Loan program for qualified homeowners. To begin, you get up to 90 days with no mortgage payments. You receive up to 3 months payment protection against illness or unemployment. And you can take advantage of our Skip a Payment plan to use when you just can't make the payment. If you're a homeowner with too much debt, call Superior now at 1-888-678-7777. That's 1-888-678-7777.
Hello, I'm Lou Waters at CNN Center, where we continue watching developments in the crash of the Air France Concorde jetliner outside Charles de Gaulle Airport. Early this morning, it was 10:44 Eastern Time, 4:44 Paris time. Night has fallen now behind Jim Bitterman, who is at the crash scene. He's been there all day. He continues to watch developments from there, and what we're seeing is not Jim on the phone, but he's listening to me. We're seeing Jim. What's the latest?
Lou, as you can see here in the background, a number of fire vehicles and emergency vehicles are here. This intersection here that you can see is an intersection of about 5 streets, 5 small country roads, 2-lane roads, and the crash itself is over to the left. We just had a passage overhead. You may have heard of an aircraft that were right directly on the landing and takeoff path of Charles de Gaulle Airport. The planes passed right overhead, and this plane was straight off the runway when it came down. At this hour, there are Klieg lights set up at the crash scene. The crash scene itself is a burned-out area of approximately 100 yards in diameter, and in the crash scene, you see very little that's recognizable, just bits and pieces of twisted and burned metal. You also see the burned-out shell of what was a hotel restaurant that took a direct hit from the plane as it went down. Lou?
Will the work there continue through the night then, Jim?
Yes, indeed. I think crash investigators are planning to stay here throughout the night, although my guess is that, in fact, their most efficient work will be tomorrow morning when they get some daylight. One of the things that they're looking for, of course, are the bodies, and one of the things we saw earlier while there still was daylight here was that they have set out these kind of traffic cones, these orange traffic cones that you see on the street in various locations around the burned out area, and our assumption is that those traffic cones mark the positions of bodies that have already been found.
Are you getting a rather consistent picture being painted by eyewitnesses you're hearing from as to what happened?
We hear from everybody the same sort of story, and that there were flames coming from the Concorde, the back left side of the Concorde, as it was taking off. All indicate an engine was on fire as the plane was taking off. We don't have any confirmation of that from the crash investigators, and they'll be the to actually say what happened, but everybody has consistently said, and I think you have your photograph there that shows indeed that the back left side of the aircraft was on fire as it was taking off. The whole thing must have taken just a few seconds because, in fact, we're just about 3.5 miles from the end of the runway here at Charles de Gaulle, and you can see this crash site from the control tower, and you can see from the control tower of Le Bourget, which is about 1 mile in the other direction that way.
Although the Concorde may be routine for folks who live near Charles de Gaulle, it certainly is a passenger plane like no other, and I imagine there will be several photographic eyewitnesses to this business today as this whole investigation develops.
That's correct, and I think you've got the photograph that we've already seen. There may be more photographs forthcoming, or maybe some video. It is a spectacular sight when a Concorde takes off. It's also quite a noisy sight, and in fact, people may have taken pictures, taken video as the plane took off.
All right, Jim Betterman, who is our man at the scene in Gonesse, France. It's about 3 miles from the end of the runway at Charles de Gaulle Airport, where the plane took off this morning and crashed just a short while later. I'm Lou Waters at CNN Center. More news when it happens. Now back to Bobby Batista and Talkback Live.
Aaron Burr was vice president under Thomas Jefferson. In 1804, while still in office, Burr challenged and mortally wounded Alexander Hamilton in a duel. He was indicted for murder, but never tried. Couple more emails here. Erickson in Indiana says, as a Republican, I am thrilled to have a man on the ticket who represents the values and morals that made our country great. Richard in California says, this lifelong Republican is appalled at Bush's choice. I thought the Republican Party respected the freedoms of women and those who wish to walk the streets safe from guns. As much as I dislike Gore, he has my vote. I wish him well. Question from Chris over here.
Yes, recently the Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade has come under scrutiny. And as I understand it, Governor Bush's elect, Cheney, has opposed federal funding of abortions. I wonder how that will play in with the upcoming election.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Abortion always plays into an election. There's a superb study of the 1992 election that Bush's father lost, which showed that more than any other single issue, bar none, abortion had the effect of swinging more voters, and it was a net negative for George W. Bush. I think you're going to see the Democrats pounding away on the abortion issue, particularly because they need a large women's vote to win this election. You know, it's kind of sad that as we go into the 21st century, folks, that we still can't see our way past middle-aged white men at the top of the ticket. I'm sure Dick Cheney is a fine man. He's eminently qualified to be president, but there were qualified women and minorities that George W. Bush could have picked, and I'm kind of sad that we really have not put women into this kind of position at the top levels of government in this day and age.
Steve, go ahead. All the women in the audience are clapping. Steve, is it just have we just not hit is it not the right time and the right place yet, or are we still feeling the sting of Geraldine Ferraro that badly?
Well, I think you're right. I think obviously picking Geraldine Ferraro didn't work for Mondale, but I don't know that that's it. I think this is a very cautious and careful pick, and I have to admit I was a little surprised by it.
What's going on in the chat room, Kim?
A couple are, no matter who is picked for vice president, people will say that the ticket is upside down. Another one, both candidates will have running mates that are more qualified than themselves.
Well,
okay.
You know, let me say something about qualifications historically. You know, Abraham Lincoln was eminently unqualified to be president. He had no administrative experience. He had no military experience except a few weeks as a volunteer with no combat. He had served one term in the Congress. You've really got to look at the individual. It's not a resume that we're voting for. Frankly, on resumes, you know, Al Gore would probably have it hands down, but that's not the way you make your choice. You pick the character, the values, what these candidates represent, and I think there is a clear choice. There's certainly a clear choice on the Supreme Court, like your audience person said. You're going to get, as George W. Bush said, his model justice is Antonin Scalia. Obviously, the model for Gore will be more like a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's a pretty stark choice there, no matter what your values might be.
Speaking of Gore, we had disagreement between our two Republican and Democratic strategists in the first half about whether or not this would put more or less pressure on Al Gore to come up with a glamour candidate or someone, or you know, is the heat off of him? What do you think?
Oh, I think the heat's off. Absolutely. This is not a pick that puts any pressure on Al Gore, whatever. An Elizabeth Dole pick would have put great pressure on Al Gore to pick a woman. A John McCain pick would have put great pressure on Al Gore to pick someone who can appeal to independents and moderate Democrats. Colin Powell pick probably would have caused Al Gore to throw in the towel, but we know that's never in the cards. He's now got a free pick. Look, 51% approval, 38% people don't even know him. If I remember correctly, Al Gore had something like 60 and upwards back in 1992. This is not a pick that's going to have resounding appeal and popularity among the American people. It will be appealing to the talking heads, but it's the American people that count. Al Gore can now pick someone who's qualified to be president, who's younger, dynamic, and can bring a new dimension to the ticket. I don't think he's going to pick George Mitchell.
Steve, do you agree?
Well, I do agree with one note of caution. If Al Gore's numbers, and if somebody on his campaign is believing the polls, which is kind of foolhardy at this point, but if they think they're behind, then he might try something a little bit riskier. But in general, I agree. I think that such a cautious pick by Governor Bush will allow Gore to basically pick whoever he wants.
Faye in the audience, question or comment?
Yes, I'd just like a thought-provoking question for all of us who may be opposed to abortions. Have we considered adopting, or have we adopted children ourselves? And I think it's something that we each need to look more thoroughly into our own lives and how we conduct our lives, what we expect to go in the world.
And a couple of more emails here. Ann from Illinois says the woman's vote is not only about abortion, but about education, public safety, the environment. Cheney's record is disastrous. George W. Bush showed his true colors with this choice. Betty in Virginia says George W. Bush made an excellent choice. He and Dick Cheney should be pushovers for the Democrats. And that'll have to be our last word on that. Alan Lichtman, thank you so much for joining us. Steve Talley, appreciate your insight into this as well. Thank you to all of you out there and here for joining us. And we'll see you again tomorrow at our regular time, 3 o'clock Eastern. Inside Politics is next. And stay with CNN for the very latest.
Now available at ussearch.com. Tonight on CNN News 10, An Air France Concorde crashes just after takeoff outside Paris. Complete coverage. CNN Newsstand tonight, 10 Eastern.
Every online investor dreams of finding a broker with low commissions, cutting-edge technology, and personal customer service. At Scottrade, we've got you covered. Our real-time streaming quotes and charts are eye-popping. And when you combine that technology with $7 market orders and customer service delivered through 115 branches nationwide, you have an online brokerage firm that simply can't be beat. Open an account today and receive our real-time streaming quotes and charts through the end of the year, absolutely free. Scottrade.com.
Summer overstock sell-off. More than $15 million of inventory has created a massive overstock at Landmark Ford. Prices have been dramatically reduced. More than 125 full-size F-Series pickups up to $10,000 below actual MSRP. Explorers $195 per month. Expeditions $273. Summer overstock sell-off at Landmark Ford in Tiger, just off I-5 at the Haynes Road exit. Landmark Ford. Get more. Spend less.
It's the 21st century, and you thought the internet would make life easier. But who can remember all those websites? Then remember this one, rewards2k.com. The one address for all your favorite stores. Finger Hut with thousands of quality products. Domestications, beautiful home furnishings at great prices. Improvements with innovative products for home and garden. Best of all, when you shop rewards2k.com, you get free rewards. Log on today, or for more information, call 1-800-4REWARDS.
It started a few months ago. She just feels sad, hopeless. Seems like she's always tired. She doesn't eat. She seems to feel miserable about life. I wish she was happier, but this condition is hard to reason with. When I heard about the research study, I called to learn more. If you or someone you love is suffering from these symptoms, call now to see if you qualify for the study. Picking up the phone is the hardest part.
Step into the crossfire. Weeknights, 7:30 Eastern on CNN.